It's the finest fantasy films of the 1980s with our special guest, Adam Baritot. This is the Outdated Entertainment Hour. Hey, everybody. I'm Bob Smith, longtime journalist in the New York, Long Island area for national magazines and local ones as well. And welcome back to the Outdated Entertainment Hour. You may know me from my other podcast, the Outdated Wrestling Hour, but this looks at general entertainment in a whole new way, hopefully. And people have asked me, what's with the outdated? We know you're old, but what's the deal with outdated? Well, here's the deal. Outdated is just another word for classic. So on this edition, we're going to look at classic fantasy films of the 1980s with somebody who's really into them. His name is Adam Baritot. It's somebody I've known for about 10 years here in the New York area. He's an actor and performer and director on his own right, and he's done so much work. So he's uniquely qualified to talk about these things. And I think you'll enjoy getting to know him and listening to what he has to say about so many great movies from the 1980s. So, get yourself a nice beverage or something. We're going to have a quick word from Joe Walsh, and we'll be right back with the fantasies and the films of the 1980s. Don't you dare go nowhere.
This is Joe Walsh. One thing I do when I'm not playing rock and roll is get on the air as an amateur radio operator. Also called ham radio, is a communication service provided by ordinary people just like you and me. We have a national emergency communication system in place 24/7, 365. Find out more about amateur radio at arrl.org/What is ham radio? See you on the air.
Life is a funny thing. You never know who you're going to meet and where you're going to meet them. My guest on this particular show, as you know, we're going to talk about the fantasy films of the 1980s, but this fellow I met in the most unexpected way. I was bowling one day, and this guy joined my team. And I'm like, okay, we got a new bowler. I never heard of this guy. I didn't know if he was just starting out, but I did notice he was practicing all the time. Different houses, too. We would go to different bowling centers and practice. All right, you figure, he's a truck driver. Is he a truck driver, or is he a lumberyard person? No. He's a very cultured, very smart, very funny guy. His name is Adam Baritot, and he's got an entertainment background. Adam, welcome.
Thank you so much, Bob. It's great to be here.
No, it really is good to see you. This is the summer for us. We both bowl in the fall on Wednesday nights. You coming back Wednesdays?
I expect to. We'll see what happens. Again,
okay.
If theater happens, I got to go do theater. But hey.
Yes. All right. So since I have you on the show, I want to introduce yourself and tell us where you've been in the entertainment world on a personal level. I think people will be impressed.
Oh, gracious. I started out in the theater world. I went and I got a degree in music in the mid to late 90s. And I dove right in with live theater because that's really what I love to do. And my resume has taken me all over the United States. I've done national tours. I've done regional houses. I worked for Iverton in Connecticut, and Jenny Wiley in Kentucky. And I've been on international tours. Last big one I went out on pre-COVID in 2017, 2018, I was on the international tour of Legally Blonde. And that was touring specifically China. So I got to play Professor Callahan all over the east coast of China, which was pretty cool. Fascinating thing when you do theater in China, it's kind of like seeing an opera in the United States. They have super titles with the translations of what you're saying while it's going on. So it's very
Really?
like that opera house experience. It's very cool.
Hmm.
But yes, I trained in opera originally, found that I was much happier in musical theater. Have a long list of voiceovers in my past. Various companies worked for Hi-Fi Video Games most recently, did some VOs for one of their slot machines. You've probably heard me if you've been to a casino. So
Hmm.
it's funny how the entertainment world works. For a while, I worked in New York City. I did the American Girls Review at American Girl Place. You know, the dolls with all the
Yeah,
historical.
yeah.
Yeah, they used to have a show inside their store, and it was basically an industrial. It was an advertisement for all the dolls, but people were paying $50 a head to see me perform for an hour with a bunch of girls. It was fascinating, and it's the great thing about theater is you never know where it's going to take you, and
Mhm.
have stories and stories from the road which will last me a lifetime.
That's
Such a treat
great.
to.
It kind of sounds like me. It kind of sounds like me with my old time in the blues circuit. It's like that stuff. Mere mortals don't get a chance to do this stuff, Adam. I'm telling you, we're very lucky.
I know how lucky I am, and I know how fortunate that life was. It's a little tricky right now. Theater is very much having to come the comeback trail after COVID. We lost a bunch of companies. So who knows? Who knows what the future is going to hold?
Well, I'll have you know that I've seen, I think, 3 shows in the last 4 or 5 months. I saw the Tommy revival, which was pretty good. I wouldn't say it was great, but it was very entertaining, we'll put it that way. And a
It
terrific modernization audio video wise, and the music was just great.
mhm.
Also saw, John Patrick Shanley's latest play. The name is escaping me right now, but you know what? That was a smaller production, obviously, and it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that. But Cicely Strong was the main character in that from SNL, and that was very, very good.
Very cool. Do like Cicely Strong. Love her work.
Yes, but
You know,
in any event, I have seen a bunch of plays in the last few months, and I'm glad to be going back to the theater. Are you doing it as well? I mean, do you venture into Broadway every so often, or?
every once in a while I go to see some shows. Certainly, there are some shows that are on my list that I definitely want to take in. I haven't seen Hadestown yet. I know I'm behind a couple of years there. Very much want to go and see Merrily. Merrily We Roll Along. It was this is a discussion that will take a whole day. It was Sondheim's biggest flop back in the 70s when it first opened. It closed in 2 weeks. It was terrible, terrible reviews. Sondheim did not recover from it well, but it was one of his favorite shows, and he's like, I keep working on it, I keep working on it. After his passing, they put on Merrily, and now it's a huge hit. It won several Tonys at this year's Tony Awards.
Mm.
You won a Tony for Jonathan Groff. You won a Tony, Jonathan Groff, I think so. You won a Tony for the guy who played Harry Potter, whose name is escaping me right now, Daniel Radcliffe.
Daniel Radcliffe, right?
Yes. Tremendous crowds every night, multiple standing ovations. The trick with this show is that it takes place backwards. You start at the end of the show with everybody hating the main character because he's become old and rich and evil. And it goes backwards in time, and you so slowly see him at each point where he started to sell a piece of his soul, a sell of a piece of his soul. And you end the show in, I think it was the 1960s, the way it was time period written. He and his friends just getting out of college and they're ready to take on the world. And so you get this happy ending at the end, telling the story backwards.
Right.
Fascinating. If you ever get the
Yeah,
chance.
it sounds like so. By the way, the show with Cicely Strong, John Patrick Shanley's Brooklyn Laundry. It just
Brooklyn
popped
Laundry.
back in my head. You know why? Because I'm older than dirt, and it takes me a long time to remember things. So that was the show, and it was great. That was small theater right in Midtown City
That at
Center.
Manhattan Theater Club.
City Center. Yeah, it was great. A great candy store right across the road too. It's a lot of fun. It's got the old time apothecary style. Have some chocolate beans or whatever.
Why not? I'm a
Yeah,
fan.
it was great. So, you're gonna have to come back soon, and we'll do a show about Broadway. How's that sound?
Absolutely. Certainly I could talk about Broadway for hours.
Yes,
But
and
today,
you know what? I'd like to hear about Broadway for hours. So you got a date for that. But in any event, we're here to talk about the fantasy films of the 1980s. Now, This was kind of your idea. So why
Absolutely.
the 80s? What about the fantasy films that captured you in that VCR driven decade? We'll put it that way.
Well, you touch upon it exactly, and I'll get to that. I'm giving away my age when I say I was a child in the 1980s, which, perfectly fine. Happy to be in my 40s. Uh, there was such such a wellspring of fantasy movies coming up in the 1980s. The 1980s was a brilliant time for films that might not have gotten a lot of attention when they were in the box office, when they were in the theater. With the advent of, as you said, as with the advent of VCRs, I remember we had an old beta VCR. For those of you who know what those are, we would, especially some of us, I grew up out in the middle of nowhere. The weekend would come and, well, okay, we can't drive to a movie theater because that's 15, 20 miles away. Oh, but there's a video store like a half mile away. We can go there and we can thumb around and find a couple of movies. And it doesn't take you long to wade through the video store. You've seen all the latest big hits and then you're like, ooh, what's this? Oh, Labyrinth. This is a Jim Henson film. How did I never hear of this? When were this in the theater? And you take this film home and you're like, my God, this is one of the greatest things I've ever seen. Who's David Bowie? And your poor little 8-year-old, 9-year-old mind is just exploding with the possibilities of what culture can be, with what this particular genre of film could be. It was a brilliant time for these movies. Film companies weren't so infatuated with IP and generating sequel upon sequel upon sequel. There were many small budgets given to films that were like, oh, this could be interesting. We shoot it out in the English countryside. We get some cheap costumes. Boom, we have a film. It becomes this magnificent zeitgeist, this group of films that were just so influential to so many of my generation.
You know something? The list you've come up with, they've all lasted.
Yeah.
These are all very fondly remembered films, and people don't think 1980s of these films. They just think of them as classic films at this point.
Exactly right. The thing is, at the time, many of them were flops. A majority of the lists I gave you on that film were flops, did not do well in the theater. I mentioned Labyrinth, did terrible in the theater. Legend, that wonderful Tom Cruise Mia Sara film, did terribly at the theaters, in spite of Tim Curry turning in a performance for the ages as the flipping devil with huge freaking horns. I can still see the original poster or box cover with that image. Just gorgeous, gorgeous work. Didn't do well. In spite of Ridley Scott having his name on that as the director, did not fly well. Yeah, there were just a host of these films. Some of them, like The Princess Bride, which I'm sure we'll talk a lot about. Princess Bride did actually reasonably well, had a great cast. Billy Crystal was very hot at the time. This guy named Mandy Patinkin, who no one had ever heard of up until that point, turns in a brilliant performance. Everybody turns in a brilliant performance in that film, and everybody has this brilliant career afterward. But they all knew they were making magic at that point.
Well, the VCR in the 80s was the TV of the 50s.
Oh, yes.
In that, it used to be like, we'll go way back when. It's a Wonderful Life was not a box office. Actually, it was a box office failure. Everybody thought it was hokey, and no, it wasn't. It didn't hit the right tone for its time. But when it hit television, it became a classic. There are many films that fit that description, I think. And a few of yours here definitely do. But on the VCR as opposed to on television.
Yeah, the VCR thing was an interesting transition. For example, film from 1971 was a box office bomb. Just did not do well. It was sponsored by like Quaker Oats. It was supposed to be a commercial for their products. Did not do well. 1984 comes out, and this film, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, gets released on home video. And all of a sudden, it is a classic. It is a cult classic. It is Gene Wilder performing magic on that screen. 5 kids who I think only one of the 5 ever did much work thereafter. But it was this just tremendously magical cast, fun music by Anthony Newley and Leslie Bricusse. Just a brilliant, brilliant film that tanked at the box office. Just tanked. I think it was Paramount who was producing it, had no idea how to market it. No idea. Right. But by the time 1984 comes around, you put out a film. Gene Wilder's had a great career since then. You're like, oh, what's this? And it's that video store discovery, which makes magic happen.
The little brother to that was cable TV too.
Oh yes.
I was working in a record store around 82 when the indie film Eddie and the Cruisers nobody went and saw, but when it played on Cinemax, people went bananas and made a #1 album out of that, and a huge hit.
Yeah. Absolutely. I even watched Eddie and the Cruisers 2, Eddie Lives, as a result of seeing that film because I'm like, oh, how does this continue? But again, I know, fascinating.
Yeah, yeah.
But yes, HBO Cinemax, it's a similar story. When The Neverending Story came out, I did not see it in the theater. Did not end up seeing that film, even though for me, it's one of the more formative films of my childhood. Those who know me know, don't mention Artax and the Swamp. It's still too soon. It probably played 4 or 5 or 6 times a week for a while on HBO. I think it was 1985. My family took this long road trip vacation and we were staying in hotel after hotel after hotel all along the East Coast. And at every hotel, they'd turn on the TV and like, oh, Never-Ending Story's on. My folks knew they could plunk me and my brother and sister in front of it. And we'd just sit and watch the thing. And we'd be transfixed and they'd have an hour and a half to themselves. Such incredible scene work. Such incredible project design. Such beautiful costuming. Such a compelling story. It was something we could all kind of latch onto. It wasn't just, there was also a sci-fi film thing happening at the same time, but that's a much longer conversation. But yeah, it was this and eventually Tron. They showed Tron and this in sequence. And both were just, just evocative to the imagination.
Who were the stars in Neverending Story?
Neverending Story. Let's see. That was Barrett Oliver as Bastian. Tammy Stroh. I apologize if I mispronounced the last name. She played the Empress. I think it was her first film. Noah Hathaway would have been your Atreyu. Couple random adults in there. Gerald McCraney plays Bastian's father. That's probably the biggest name you're going to recognize. Mm-hmm. Voiceover work, you've got some of the classics working on this as well. Strangely enough, Deep Roy, for those of you who have seen that particular actor, made one of his first film appearances in the film as well.
It's a great pick. So let's go back to The Princess Bride because
absolutely,
it's one of my favorite films of all time, to be honest with you. And a lot of people list it that way. That one was a hit in the theaters. It was a hit on cable. It was a hit on disc, VHS, you name it. Mm-hmm. I know people who own it in every. They've got the VHS. They've got a streaming copy. Blah blah blah. Down the line it goes. Perfectly casted. I do a wrestling show. Andre the Giant was in it. Billy Crystal, one of the great cameos of all time. Carrie Elwes, instant star right there. Same with Robin Wright. Just go down the list of every performance. Give me your thoughts on that one because it's funny, it's moving, it's tear jerking, it's got everything. What a film that was! Rob Reiner's greatest moment, probably.
Easily, it was a perfect storm. You have a book by William Goldman, who did his own script production of it. You had a couple of young performers who were probably not known at the time, but instantly became household names. Carrie Elwes and Robin Wright. Robin Wright, who's gone on to do magnificent, brilliant work. Carrie Elwes certainly as well, although he doesn't quite have the awards that Robin does at this point. I did get to work with Carrie on a television show a while back. And he's the sweetest, kindest man. Just has time for every single person. It was a long shoot day. I was doing a little background work for Mrs. Maisel. And he came out and he just sat with the audience. And he was just talking about telling stories about The Princess Bride, telling stories about how Jamie Lee Curtis was at the production because she was, I don't know if they were dating or married yet. I think she was dating Christopher Guest at the time. And how they were feeding everybody at a point, like they were going to their hotel room and they were just eating because this was a love project. They were making money, but they weren't making bank. And so this was very much a thing of everybody knew this was a brilliant piece of work. Throughout my career, I've kind of marked moments where I've met people who starred in The Princess Bride because they seemed like little flagposts for me along my life. When I was 19, I did get to meet Mandy Patinkin. He was doing a concert and I think it was my birthday. Actually, I had these tickets for my birthday to see him in concert. And he came by coffee shop. I went to the coffee shop afterwards going, that was an amazing night. And in walks Mandy Patinkin to buy things for his crew. We ended up having a brief conversation and he gave me some very good early career advice, which I've taken part. I know from his stories that he was just getting over the death of his own father playing this role. And for example, so many of us have so much of the script memorized, but there's a point where he's fighting Count Rugen and he drives the sword into his abdomen. He goes, "I want my father back, you son of a bitch." He meant that with every fiber of his being, and you see it on his face. And when you understand how much personal investiture everybody had in this film, it says so much. It says so much. I can spin further. This was
No. There's so much about that movie too.
It was on the heels of Spinal Tap.
The
too.
setting with the grandfather reading to the grandson. I mean, every part of this is so novel and so different. This is a bad equation, but I'm going to use it anyway. It's like Bugs Bunny cartoon, classic Bugs Bunny. Adults and kids both got into it. Do you know what I'm saying? In other words, there was enough whimsy in it for children, enough action in it for kids, and enough laughs for everybody. I mean, it had everything. It is a brilliant piece of work. To me, my favorite probably fantasy film of all time. Now that you bring it up,
Absolutely. It was perfectly cast. You were accurate. It was so brilliantly scripted. You had the right director with Rob Reiner. Again, coming on the heels of Spinal Tap. This, I believe it was after Spinal Tap, pretty sure. Just such a brilliant eye for what this film was to look like. And many of the people in the cast talk about meeting the other people in the cast early on going, "Oh, wow, you are terrific. Oh, you're terrific. Oh, this is going to be brilliant." And everybody got quietly very hyped up about the brilliance of this film. Most members of my circle in my generation don't need to watch the film anymore because we have it memorized. So many of us can just quote it book, line, and verse because it was that informative. It was so important to us. I took fencing lessons because I saw that film. I saw that brilliant, possibly the finest sword fight in all of film history. I watched that fight going, "I want to do that." And my younger brother watched that film going, "Yeah, I want to do that." And we both went and studied fencing because we wanted to be able to do that sword fight.
Get
And
out.
we got pretty close. We couldn't do all of it. But we were learning how to cut, mark in the same ways that they did and using the dialogue at the same time because it was that informative. Mandy Patinkin even talks about getting the role, going, "Yes, of course I can sword fight," and going, "Crap, I better get really good at sword fighting because he's the finest swordsman in the world." And he took intensive training for months to be able to sword fight for that. Small bit of trivia, he still has the sword.
That's cool.
That's
And you
very
know what?
cool. He
And
was
you know what? Andre the Giant.
yes.
What an
Oh,
endearing performance. I mean, I didn't see that coming. I thought he would be a big mute giant. No way. It's indelible. I mean, he was the sweetest big man ever. And you know what? People say that was the real Andre too,
yep.
in real life.
Yes, so many do. He had to learn a lot of the script phonetically because, again, not his primary language, but he all the stories are he was this biggest, cuddliest man, and knowing that Fred Savage had this long-term Christmas card relationship with him, sending each other messages for years and years. Fun thing to delve into later if you want to talk about that. He was so much heart on the screen, and there are stories about him. I don't know if you know the flatulence story. There was some scene they were shooting when the fight had come down to they had come down to the end of the shot, or they were in the middle of the shot, and Andre lets out this huge colossal fart in the middle of everything, just resonant fart, and nobody can keep a straight face. Everybody has lost it. Everybody has lost their shit, and I can't tell you the correct details of this particular story, but I will dig it up for you in the future. But it was this like rehearsal stopping, shoot stopping flatulence was how some people remember Andre, and that's just adorable and enjoyable.
Every frame, poetry. I can't help it. It's like I've seen a lot of films in my time, but it's just about perfect. I mean, it doesn't drag. It's paced so wonderfully. It's photographed spectacularly. I mean, it's got it all. I never rave about things a lot. That movie I rave about. It makes our conversation makes me want to go home, pop into DVR, and have a blast. You know?
Oh, I'll probably watch it again later tonight.
Yeah, we probably both will.
Because
Yeah.
it's been a while, and I've got it on disc. I got to see it. It's definitely worth my time to see that again. It's always worth my time to see The Princess Bride. I'm
Yeah.
never unhappy when I sit there and watch it, even if it's possibly the 150th time I've now seen it.
You know what? Let me get off topic just a little. What's your favorite movie of all time? I'll tell you mine.
Oh, gracious. Oh, complicated. Too complicated. It depends
All
on
right.
the genre, depends
I,
on the.
I do have
Uh,
a pick. It's the original producers with Gene Wilder and Zero Mostel. I'm sorry. I laugh at every joke. I've watched it about 500 times. I'm going to watch it 500 more times. When
it's
I'm blue, I put that movie on, and it cures my blues, man. It's
that is,
something else.
that is a worthy choice. It's definitely in the top 20 for me. Definitely.
And
Uh,
I know about the revivals, and I know about the Broadway show, and I was there, and I've seen the secondary film. Nothing compares to that original. You know what I'm saying? That first movie made me want to move to New York City.
it was that combination of Zero and Gene at just the
Mhm.
right time in both of their careers. You've got,
Dick
well,
Shawn, right.
Sean,
Yeah,
Dick
L
Shawn is,
LSD,
I
baby.
still crack up whenever I see him. Funnily enough, he had a small role in Captain EO as the commander giving Michael Jackson his orders. Another little brief fantasy film from the 1980s for you. It's just such a brilliant cast and the producers.
Yeah, so
So
anyway,
many.
it's off our topic, but
I know,
I just
but
wanted to
hey,
run it by you. I'm
I
glad you like my choice anyway.
yeah. Yeah, this again, Princess Bride was formative. That was a case where the film was loved, it was a hit at the box office, it was a hit on video, and it is timeless for here on out. A lot of the other films on the list, not as much. They did not hit the ground running, but time has made them either cult classics or, frankly, in some cases, just classics because
Mhm.
enough people have watched them over the years going, okay, it's been 35 years, but man, does this film still stand.
You know, and that's the thing about your list, they all do. They don't look dated at all. None of them. Not on one of these.
Yeah. I put
Maybe Conan the Barbarian. You have Conan the
where I was
Barbarian
going next.
Destroyer,
Yeah.
and it's only because of the limitations of, shall we say, costuming?
Sure. It's perhaps a little dated.
Yeah,
Uh,
just that one. And you have Time Bandits on your list. Nice choice. I mean, what a cast. Talk about Time Bandits a little bit.
oh, where do I start? This was Terry Gilliam into his fantasy salvo. Terry Gilliam went through a sequence of a few different fantasy films. Some people regard Brazil as one of those fantasy films. I kind of think of it more of as a psychological thriller. I always walk away drained when I see Brazil. But Time Bandits was just this youthful, joyful energy, and of course, Fisher King and Baron Munchausen thereafter. But with Time Bandits, you have all of these folks who were originally are either Ewok performers, just this whole team of diminutive performers led by the guy who played the wizard on that old television show. And they were just little miscreants running around causing trouble across time and space. And this kid comes along with them for the ride. And it's this unending list of cameo performances. You've got random Sean Connery in there twice as two different characters. You've got the Pythons helping out wherever and whenever. Um, Still, whenever I hear the Michael Palin line, "Pansy, oh, the problem, I need fruit," I think, and I just smile. It's just so much joy to think about this film. Was it a hit? No. None of Terry Gilliam's films have ever really been hits per se. They're always met with this, oh, what is Terry Gilliam up to again? One of his most recent salvos, Dr. Parnassus. Same story. Mind you, he did lose his lead actor in the middle of shooting. But the imagination has to be bowed to. It led to mind expanding ideas of what was possible for child audiences. Because our parents are like, oh, yeah, here, just put this on. They'll be fine. They'll be fine. No, we'll be terrified. That's one of the things about fantasy movies of the 1980s. They came hard. They had no qualms about making terrifying things happen on this.
You're right. I never really looked at it, and you're listing those terms, but you're absolutely correct in that they may be for the kids, but it ain't kid stuff. I guess
Oh
it's the only
no,
way to put it.
it is. I am scarred for life and happy about it. Some of the I mentioned the horse drowning in the swamp, Artax. My friends know, don't mention that to me. But there are terrifying things in every one of these films. Like you get to the end with the kid whose parents aren't paying attention to him. A very common thing for us Gen X kids raised by boomer parents who were never home because they were working. Again, not always our parents' fault. But still, this whole idea of parents not paying attention to us and the kid pointed the thing in the microwave, don't touch it, it's evil. I still think of that. Just there were no punches pulled. Fantasy films in the 1980s had no qualms about killing off a character, about causing pain to their audience, knowing that there might be a payoff at the end. Mind you, in Time Bandits, it was a much smaller payoff because this is Gilliam and he's very existential in his creation. So, yeah.
Jonathan Pryce was in that film, right?
Yes, Jonathan Pryce is in the film.
Boy, talk about, to me, he's kind of like the figurehead for the Gilliam 80s fantasy films.
Absolutely.
What an underrated actor he is. You know, he's one of the real greats in that era. I put it to you.
You get no argument from me. Jonathan Pryce was, at that time, he was one of the preeminent actors on film and certainly on stage. He was the original engineer in Miss Saigon. That casting would never fly today, but at the time it was enough to I think he got the Tony nomination. I don't know if he won, but Jonathan Pryce got the idea. He was someone who was very much capable of playing that negative capability of the character. Is this a good character? Is this a bad character? And Gilliam is all about walking that razor blade edge between, oh, this is a happy film. No, this is a sad film. Nah, it's more of that wry in between. Yes, there are good things happening, but terrible things happening at the same time. And Jonathan Pryce is so perfectly suited as a performer for that negative capability. I have enjoyed his career immensely, and certainly he's one of the better interpreters of Gilliam's work, and it's always a treat to see him on the screen.
Yeah, they're a match set, those two.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's go down the list. The first thing you had written down was Legend.
Yes. Oh, Legend, again, Ridley Scott film. You're talking mid-'80s, young Tom Cruise playing kind of a ranger character, the unicorn has been dehorned, and the world has been plunged into eternal winter. And Tom Cruise has to go get that unicorn horn back in order to fix the unicorn so that the unicorns come back and the sun can rise again and the world will no longer be in winter. Kind of a very fantastical concept. You've got, again, some of the heavy hitters. Again, this was a great time for diminutive actors. Billy Barty is in this. Tremendous performance there. Mia Sara's very young, playing the character Lily, and she is ultimately captured by the character played by Tim Curry. The book, the IMDb calls him Darkness, but essentially a devil. Huge flippin' horns, vocoded voice, even too low for Curry, but just a brilliant performance. Terrifying, absolutely flipping terrifying when he steps out of the mirror in cloven feet and horns that extended like a good 2.5 feet off of his head. The image alone, I can close my eyes and summon the image instantly of this film. Terrifying. Such large brush strokes. Evil has to be that strong so that you know how strong good is when it endures and wins. Just a magnificent balance of a film. Again, images are sumptuous, lots of filter on the lens, everything is warm and sunny, and then it's blue light and winter and darkness and snow everywhere. Just staggering contrast, beautiful contrast. Did poorly at the box office. Again, not all these production companies knew how to market these films. Not until the home video market really came around did we sit there and go, oh, we just give it to kids.
Yeah.
And was this really for kids? Nah.
No.
Maybe not. But certainly
Well, I will say this, and I'll just interject here. If anything strikes a nerve with anybody listening out there, type it in on your streaming box. Chances are you'll find a lot of these films many times for free. So you may be able to see a classic you may not know of.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
How about Labyrinth?
Labyrinth again. Labyrinth was the last film that Jim Henson directed himself.
Is that right? That's a good piece of trivia there.
That film. Thereafter, it was either Oz or one of the other hitters. But Jim Henson personally crafted Labyrinth, and the style of the narrative it shows. This was not happy-go-lucky Muppets. people were expecting, oh, silly Muppets and explosions and it's a little risque. Ha ha ha, it's the Muppet Show. No, this was true fantasy. To tie it together for previous, the screenplay for Labyrinth was written by Terry Jones, formerly of Monty Python.
Right.
So you have this marvelous meeting of the minds here. You've got David Bowie, who wrote all the music for the film. Incredibly powerful performance there. And again, formative. I wanted to be the Goblin King when I grew up because I'm like, that's really cool. Invariably, this probably drove me into theater. Certainly the performance, Jennifer Connelly playing the lead in this one, Sarah. She is empathetic and cute and everything we want to follow along for our heroine. And she eventually was a victim to the story, but eventually became in control of the story, which was a really wonderful narrative for children to follow along with, especially young girls watching the film. It was a great dynamic for that. You don't have a little boy hero, you have a girl hero, and she's tremendous. And she gets there by the friends she makes and by understanding herself and controlling the world around her. And it's really beautiful. It's a wonderful message. And yeah, Jim Henson all day long. Fun characters. You have Ludo, arguably one of my favorite characters. There's some Princess Bride parallels here. Ludo is allegedly this big, allegedly dumb character, but he has the biggest heart, and he's just so kind. And he's friends with the rocks, and the rocks will come help him if he calls to them. Just such an enriching story for a young person to watch, and accessible to children. But again, scary. Very scary. David Bowie, when it first appears, gliding, creepy music, able to do that trick with the crystal ball, moving it around in his hand. I still can't do it. I keep practicing. So evocative of the nightmares, the goblin under your bed, perhaps. The movie, in spite of being terrifying at points, teaches you if you're strong enough in your will, if you understand the world around you, you don't need to be afraid of the goblin because the goblin has no power over you.
Jim Henson, man. Jim Henson.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
There's a genius who happened to do a lot of good in the world, and he's probably in my top 10 of most admired overall people in the entertainment business. Who did more good for the world than Jim Henson? Seriously.
Absolutely.
In so many different ways.
So yeah,
It's
if you've not
amazing.
seen Labyrinth, please do. Anyone listening, go see Labyrinth. Give yourself an hour and a half. Choreography. Fun little thing here for my sci-fi friends. The choreography was done for the scenes was done by Cheryl McFadden. You probably know her as Gates McFadden. She played the Doctor on Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Okay, there's some trivia for you.
There's some fun trivia. I bring as much as I can with that.
Mm-hmm. Shall we go to the Dark Crystal?
Speaking of terrifying, The Dark Crystal is again Jim Henson. This is 3 years before. I think Oz directed this one. Don't quote me on that. The Dark Crystal, much heavier story, much slower story pacing. This one plays more like a grand epic now than Labyrinth. Labyrinth definitely feels like a 90-minute movie. I don't know how long The Dark Crystal is, but it feels like it's 3.5 hours. But when you do sit through it, when you sit through the entirety of The Dark Crystal, it is this grand, sweeping, operatic level story of the splitting of this whole race into good and evil, and them slowly reassembling themselves together because of this damaged stone. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant film. It is a much slower pace. And this is the thing you'll notice when you go from early 80s films to mid to late 80s films. The pacing on the early 80s films, like with Excalibur or the like, was a bit slower. Even though there were action sequences, there was still there wasn't underscoring under all of the scenes. There were some scenes where you were just listening to voices. You didn't have I think Star Wars was starting to premiere this idea where you could hear machine noises underneath everything when the dialogue was occurring. A lot of this stuff was done in a dead room. There might be some underscoring, but you've definitely felt the vacuum of a lack of underscoring at points, which was fascinating. Just a brilliant film. You definitely see how they go from The Dark Crystal to Labyrinth, where that imagination is. They were pushing the limits of what a puppet could do. Keep in mind, Before that point, people think, oh, the Muppet Show. Oh, we're doing puppets. This was puppets, but it was opera. It was grand. It was huge. And no one had ever attempted anything like that. And as such, folks didn't know what to do with it. So it potentially fell flat. Now, considered one of the greater fantasy films of all time, perhaps by some. But we see that the idea of the epic fantasy film can still stay, and that they did it with puppets, or puppets is even more brilliant.
Okay, now the next one on the list I'm not overly familiar with is Dragon Slayer. You're going to have to fill me in on this one.
Dragon Slayer. Dragon Slayer is a more compact narrative. Again, this was, you rented Willy Wonka, you rented Labyrinth. Okay, Dragon Slayer, this looks like fun. Peter McNichol was the lead in this. Many folks will recognize him from his turn on Ally McBeal. Peter McNichol plays this young kid who is thrust into the narrative of becoming a dragon slayer and saving the princess. But it's very traditionally minded, but we're talking about the early 80s. They can finally make a dragon that looks fairly convincing and compelling. So this was what the reason this film is on the list is we start to see, yes, for its world building, but also because we're seeing technology catch up to these fantastical stories where we can put a dragon on the screen that can truly terrify. And that's one of the reasons I include this on the list. So talking about Dragon Slayer leads me into the next film I was going to talk about, which is Lady Hawk, which has some similarities to it. Again, not a lot of budget for the most part, although, like I said, Dragon Slayer spent most of it on the dragon. But you have this really self-contained small story. I mean, great score by the Alan Parsons Project, one of the things that sticks in your mind. But you have a young Matthew Broderick as this little mousy character trying to get into tight spaces. You've got Rutger Hauer being Rutger Hauer for an hour and a half. You've got Michelle Pfeiffer being Michelle Pfeiffer for an hour and a half. Him being all stalwart and knightly, and her being willowy and gorgeous. And it's that love story where they can't be together because in the daytime she's a hawk and at night he's a wolf. And they have to be standing together like during I thought it was Twilight, but it might be like a solar eclipse in front of the guy that cursed them in order to break the spell. There was so much with magic. And you didn't need twinkles and sparkles and special effects. It's one of the big distinctive factors between the wonderful fantasy films of the 80s and films of today. All of that would have been CGI'd. Now, it wouldn't be, there was very practical effects. It felt very real. And so there was a magical realism that was lent to it. Mm-hmm. So much of your modern filmmaking, yes, that's great. I love the deep fakes are interesting, but they never look quite right to me.
No, me too. I see CGI. You too?
Yeah. They're generally, I can tell, although they're sadly getting really good at that, and that might be a problem for all of us in the future.
Right.
But so far, to this point, it's still somewhat noticeable. But there's something tactily pleasing about these films from the 80s because there were a lot of practical effects. In The Dark Crystal, in Labyrinth, you're dealing with puppets. Puppets are tactile things. Jennifer Connelly could reach out and hug Ludo, and that was really effective and important. It's a thing that has changed over 30 years, 40 years since these films were made. And I'm not saying that what's made now is good or bad. I'm just saying that it's a different feel. And there's something really just like you can sink your teeth into it in a film from this time.
Well, it's like comparing the Warner Brothers classic Looney Tunes to DreamWorks.
Yeah.
It's two entirely different things, even though they're both cartoons.
Yes, absolutely. When I think of Looney Tunes, I will go all the way up to and include Animaniacs, just because they had some of the spirit of the original. But thereafter, it's an animal.
Exactly. Yeah. All right, now the Conan duo of Barbarian / Destroyer. Now, this surprised me. This is probably the most commercially successful thing you have written, other than Princess Bride, I would think.
Right. Part of what's happening here is, again, it's a Schwarzenegger vehicle. Rock on. Schwarzenegger was at the height of his bodybuilding prowess. Lovely. Maybe even a little bit, a little bit afterwards, because the little bit of the swell is off, and that's fine. That's fine for this role. He's there to be Arnold and read lines with Arnold's voice, unlike the Hercules film where they dubbed somebody else over him. Aside from that, a well-built fantasy world. There are wizards. There are barbarians. that's basically like D&D. You get a little bit of a D&D thrill watching Conan. And he has a party. He's a barbarian, but there's also a fighter, and there's also a wizard, and there's thieves, and they're learning each other's skills. We are on a D&D trip. When our parents told us that it was the devil's work and you shouldn't be doing Dungeons and Dragons because you're going to summon demons, we could watch it in the theater. We could watch Conan doing it, and it's perfectly fine.
Wow.
So it was an accessible thing for a generation of us.
Now,
I mean,
let's move to, if I'm remembering correctly, and I usually have a good memory for crap, okay, not important things, but minutia. And I think Clash of the Titans is the worst reviewed film that you have on this list. Do you agree with that summation?
I believe you're correct. It is. And the subsequent remake was not much better.
So why is it on your list, my friend?
Again, this has something that the Dark Crystal has in that it is grand. It is big fantasy. It is operatic. And yeah, you've got some great performances in there. Yes, Mark Harmon. Yes, Burgess Meredith, who I would still watch read the phone book if he were still around. You have the gods played by godlike actors. You have Dame Maggie Smith and just this pantheon of brilliant performances. And yeah, it's mythology. So mythology is not necessarily going to be everybody's jam. And the graphics are early 80s, so there's some claymation going on at points.
Mm-hmm.
There's some screens going on, people acting in front of a big movie screen going on at points. And that's fine, because if the storytelling's there, it's really enjoyable. Again, it was not everybody's cup of tea, and if you watch it with today's eyes, it's not always perfect. There are some gaps in the acting ability here and there. But at the end of the day, if you pretend you're a 7-year-old kid and it's the 1980s, and there's nothing on television because you only get 3 or 4 stations because you don't have cable, and you've been through the other rentals, and you're like, oh, I'll learn a little bit about mythology. It was a little bit of edutainment for a moment, learning about some of these characters, about Andromeda and Cassiopeia, and about Pegasus and Medusa. And while it was its own narration of such things, it got you interested in the larger narrative of a segment of culture. So at the risk of saying Clash of the Titans was educational, it was a little bit. And so your folks are like, okay, so maybe there's a little nudity, but they're learning stuff. So off you go.
There you go. You know what? It doesn't have to be perfect to be fun.
It doesn't have to be perfect to be fun. In fact, a lot of things that are fun have to not be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
If it's too perfect, it's not always enjoyable. Princess Bride being the exception that proves the rule there.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of these films are flawed. And of course, as an adult, I can see the flaws. But as a kid, my imagination was willing to go wherever they'd take me. And it was such a wide breadth of fantasy available in these 1980s films that they would just take your imagination anywhere. There were so many different opportunities, and even bad films were good. Now, there are some exceptions. There are some really dreadful films from the 80s, like, I don't know, The Great Land of Small, where it's bad by any barometer. But there was enough hitting in the middle. There was enough hitting about mid-level where you're like, okay, I'm with this narrative. I can dig it.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, if ever you do the sci-fi version of this, trying to escape Star Wars, a lot of that. But that's also a situation where there was a lot of stuff in the middle where, yeah, this is pretty good. This is pretty good. And pretty good to a little kid can be amazing.
Yeah, it's a nice feeling either in the theater or at home when you start to watch something and you go, oh, I don't know about this. And 20 minutes in, it's like you're up in the sky and it took you away right with them. That's the sign of an enjoyable movie. Am I right or wrong?
Absolutely correct. Doesn't matter the quality, doesn't matter plot holes. I can look around a couple of good plot holes. If you've got my imagination, if you're telling a good story, if you're building a good world, that's what I keep coming back to. If you're building a good world, I'll join you. I'll go along. It'll be great.
There you go. Boy, you're good at this stuff. I'm telling. Is this your first podcast?
I've done a couple of other podcasts.
Oh, okay. You're
one where I was like,
oh man, I thought I was first. Doggone.
Sorry about that. But yes, I do understand the vibe, and I really enjoy podcasting. So yeah,
there you go. What other podcasts have you been on? I'd be interested to hear.
I was just recently, funnily enough, I was in Copenhagen about a week and a half ago,
That's right.
and I was the World Massage Festival was there. I'm a licensed massage therapist. I was coaching, not competing, but the founder of the festival took one look at me and goes, "I know you," and I'm like, "Yes," and he goes, "I need someone for a podcast. Come here," and I ended up going on and having a 20-minute conversation about massage in the United States. They're like, and the guy there was like, "Have you done podcasts before?" And I said, "A couple," and he goes, "You do voiceovers," and I'm like, "Yes, I do. I do voiceovers. Thank you." So yeah, it's something I've done. I just enjoy talking. I enjoy hearing the sound of my own voice, maybe, but
No, hey, that's good because I can't stand mine. Holy smokes, I can't stand it. But me, even when I was a singer, I was like, oof.
there's no such thing as bad voice.
And by the
No
way,
such.
how about we come back and do one about the '90s
Oh,
fantasy films
sure.
in the '90s? And I'm going to tell you right now what my favorite fantasy film is. People don't consider this a fantasy film, but I do because my whole family was blown away by Babe.
Oh, yes. That
Blown
again,
away.
that's magical realism again.
Hmm.
You've got you. We all presume that animals must communicate with each other somehow, but when we give them all human voices, and the walking of the sheep at the very end. Oh my God, it's such a great film.
And
Um,
here's the thing: it's a family film, but there are sections of danger and panic and not good vibes. I mean, he's separated from his mother and the whole 9 yards. It's very moving for kid video or a kid's film. It's not a kid's film. It's a fantasy film. I think that's
sure.
the big difference here.
I think we associate fantasy with children's films, although they are very much exclusive to one another.
Mhm.
Again, our parents back 40 years ago would plunk us in front of the television going, "It's a fantasy film. This should be great." Not always.
Right, right.
Not always. Again, some of these scars are still with us, but that does not mean that they weren't good for us. That does not mean that they weren't accessible to us as children. And the idea of a fairy tale being a little dangerous is traditional. Certainly, the Brothers Grimm, when they were writing their fairy tales, wanted consequences. And that's why people were having parts of their feet cut off and people were poked with red hot pokers in in fairy tales because that's the moral lesson. And I think that's we see a little bit of that with the fantasy genre is they are trying to tap into some of these films are tapping into a moral lesson. And
Yes.
then it pays off. The pain pays off.
The Brothers Grimm stuff, if you read this stuff to your kids now, you'll be horrified. I mean, it's like it was of its time. But you know what? Even if, Me TV is a new station called Me TV Tunes. And I'm
Yes,
looking at
Lord.
I'm already hooked on it because I'm an animation fan. I'm watching cartoons from the 30s and 40s and 50s, and they were so violent. But I think people had a different acceptance level then. They
Mhm.
weren't as jarred by the depictions of violence as they were later on. Once I don't know. I think we as Americans at least mellowed out for a few decades and didn't really like that. We didn't like our stuff to be too edgy. We'll put it that way.
I would I'm on board with you. I would argue possibly that we were deriving some enjoyment from a safe observation of basically a fictional character, a cartoon, a not real creature suffering. And the Germans have this lovely word for it, Schadenfreude, meaning happiness at the misfortune of others. We were deriving laughter from watching the Stooges, the
Right.
boys,
Right.
smacking holy heck out of one another. It was funny. It's still funny. I still laugh, but I know what it is. It's these people are hurting one another and it's amusing me. But that doesn't change. Comedy is still that way. Look at Friends.
They're getting hot again. This is 100 years of a Three Stooges this year.
Gracious.
Yeah, can you believe
Well,
it?
I've got to watch all 170 of them then, don't I?
By the way, there's a place to see them free.
Oh, please, pray tell.
It is the Tubi streaming service.
Tubi.
If you go onto Tubi, type in the words "The Three Stooges," you will see a black box. The black box says something like "Comedy Platinum Collection" or so. You look at that and you go, "Oh, it'll be the old public domain stuff cut up." No, it's every single Stooge short. Remastered, the Columbia remasters, the Sony remasters, all ready for the partaking. It is glorious. So there you go.
definitely going to check those out. Do you remember off the top of your head which one of those episodes has the Niagara Falls bit?
Oh gosh, that was actually filmed for a different movie. That if you look, it's a whole different. That was filmed for some movie at a circus or something like that, but it was cut from that, so they used it in one of their shorts that gone to Columbia a lot. I do not remember which one off the top of my head that was, though.
Just going to have to watch all 170 then, aren't I?
Yeah, there you go. That just started about 40 though, because they were well into the curly era at that point. But
Well,
I'm telling you, I'm loving that. The fact that I can just flip on "Whoops, I'm an Indian" anytime I want, or "Nutty But Nice," or all the other classics. And what's my favorite Stu short? I have to say, my favorite Stu short is "From Nurse to Worse," where Curly pretends to be a dog to collect an insurance payment.
Gotcha. Yep.
That may be my all-time favorite. That's just, it's so out there. And Curly in his prime, before he got ill, really in his prime at that one. So it's one of my favorites.
We used to have them on as kids, early 80s. I grew up in Rochester, New York. They used to, we had an independent station there. I think it's a Fox network now. But at the time, they'd show Three Stooges episodes in the afternoons. And we'd all just sit around and watch them. And we were allowed to until we started hitting each other trying to make the things happen. And then my folks were not as into it. But certainly when I was finally old enough to do theater, I dove right into Stage Combat and Pratt because I'm like, I want to be like the Stooges. So that's very, very much my wheelhouse, and I will definitely be watching those.
Oh, there you go. And listen, I just want to tell you on a personal level, in the last 10 years of my life, getting to know you has been a real privilege. And I'm really happy that we're pals and that you would come on to my silly brand new show here. We're only in our 5th or 6th episode and it's doing good. So we're already charting in Canada. So I don't know what that means, but.
Well, bonjour, Canada. I'm very happy to be there.
Me too. In fact, we all might be happy to be there in a few months.
I'm definitely not nodding at you at the screen right now.
Right. But in any way, no, seriously, you are a one-of-a-kind person, a very unique individual. You know your stuff, and can I invite you to come back and we'll talk about another topic? How's that sound?
Anything you like, anytime you like. This was a blast for me. And Bob, you're wonderful, man. I'll talk to you anytime you like.
Just don't beat me so bad at bowling next time. That's all. It's
I don't think that's occurred many times.
No, it has. It has. The team you're on now is pretty doggone good. How in the world did you guys not finish better than you did? By the way, we both bowled in a Wednesday night league, and I'll have you know that in the second half, my team finished in first place. And where did yours finish?
Dead last.
How was that possible?
It's possible for a number of reasons. Again,
you know what? You didn't have a full roster.
Rule. Yeah. And one of our teammates has been sick. Not going to name a name, but yes, one of our teammates has been very sick for a while. So it was hard to get all of us in the same room.
Yes. We had that problem too going into the second half. And then we all got healthy. And then it was like, oh God, we were beating teams we had no business beating the last 10 weeks. I don't think in the last 7 weeks we lost more than 2 individual games. I'm serious about this. We just got hot at the right time. Finished 30 points over 500.
That's nuts.
So we waltzed into the final. Like we were pretty much clinched 2 weeks before the final week. So that's never happened to me before, ever.
That we had that about 3 years ago. They kept putting us on the same 2 lanes.
Right.
And so we really, for like 5-6 weeks in a row, we're on the same 2 lanes, and we really got to know those 2 lanes. And the last 5 weeks, it was just 11. Nobody was beating us. We were knocking down Guacamole, and they're amazing hitters.
They are. They're great. Boy, are we boring people right now. They switched this off. The last 5 minutes of the show, we're gone, done, finished, kaput. That's it. This is Adam Baritot. I know, my friend, the best is yet to come for you. There's no question about that.
I look forward to that.
It's coming. I'm telling you. So we hope you enjoyed this little trip down memory lane here. Once again, talking about the fantasy films of the 1980s. Adam's really something, isn't he? And we're looking to have him back on the show as soon as possible. Real eye-opener for me, and I had a blast. He's a wonderful human being. He really is. So in any event, we have a few other shows I want you to check out. We come on infrequently, probably about every 2 weeks on Wednesdays, but we have a full show on Well, the 100 Years of the Three Stooges has that. We've got a show with the great author Brian R. Solomon about, the revival of cartoons and cartoon history, particularly MeTV Toons, which everybody's very, very interested in these days. We have a show about the Guess Who with Canadian writer Mark Doble. Guess Who, of course, has been in a lot of headlines lately. And we look at Americana music, where it came from. Kind of blew up out of nowhere. But we have a current Americana power pop artist named Pete Mancini, who you'll want to get to know and listen to his music too. Write to us at outdatedent@gmail.com. It's just outdatedent @gmail.com. I figure why make you spell that whole word. We have a website where you can listen to every single one of our podcasts right there. And we're never going to take them down. Never going to Patreon you for old episodes. Like my wrestling podcast has about 80 episodes now, but they're all free and they're all always going to be free. So if you want to hear the Entertainment Hour roster of shows, it's outdatedentertainment.buzzsprout.com. Tune in. They're all right there. And of course, we will be available at all the most popular podcast apps, with the exception of TuneIn right now, which is being balky about accepting new podcasts. Their luck, but we're available virtually everywhere else I can think of, including the big names like the Spotifys of the world and you name it. So look for us when you can. And please come back and join us again in a couple of weeks. You can find me on Facebook. I'm the guy singing with B.B. King. There's a million Bob Smiths, but only one sings with B.B. King. And you're looking at him right here under my old stage name of Robert Charles. And you can hear Robert Charles music on Amazon and Spotify. And I don't mean you have to buy it. You can probably just type it in and have a listen free of charge. One of my albums was produced by the great Duke Robillard. And you know what? We're going to have a blues show coming up with a very major name in blues music. I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag just yet, but that is coming. And we got a lot more coming for you too. So until next time, my name is Bob Smith. We hope you enjoyed this episode and every episode of the Outdated Entertainment Hour. And like I end all my podcasts with, it's the words of somebody who's never outdated, Ringo Starr, when he puts that V in the air with his fingers. It says, peace and love, brothers and sisters. Peace and love.